welcome to Crawlspace. Today we are re-releasing an episode that aired several years ago, and I am Tim here today with Lance, and the reason we are doing this is because a former friend and guest of ours passed away several months ago.
Yeah, it's a real somber intro here. When you say a friend, he really was. He really was a great friend, James McMahon. He would reach out on occasion without being motivated to do so other than to just check in and see how we were doing, and we would check in with him to see how he's doing. And just an awful loss, an awful tragedy. Way too young. I believe he was 44. Way too young to be taken by such a aggressive and rare disease that he had, and just really feel for his family and his other close friends that he had. The work he did in so many different avenues in the media, I mean, it's a gigantic loss. He was such a great supporter of indie rock bands, like beyond indie, right? Like he would cover bands that only had like a dozen people show up at their shows, and he would try to promote the hell out of them. You know, that's not even the true crime stuff that he worked on. But yeah, very, very sober and sombering intro here, and really necessary to keep his voice out there as much as we can. And if you haven't checked out any of James's work, or if you haven't checked it out recently and you want to go back and look at his writing style and the topics that he covered, Vice.com still has all of his articles on there, and they're so great. They're so great. They range from Michael Jackson to serious UK protests against animal deaths. I mean, he just really covered as much stuff as he could. So you go to Vice.com and just search James McMahon, and it's nice to kind of hear his voice again through his words.
Yeah, great guy, really funny, had a wide range of interests, was a longtime listener of our shows, as he speaks about in the interview that we're going to play. And by the way, this interview that we're going to play is from 2021, February of 2021. So it's been a while. The conversation ranges wildly and kind of charmingly all around. You know, we talk about Bigfoot, we talk about British Bigfoot, UFOs, we talk about Maura Murray and Andrew Gosden a little bit, Andrew Gosden being a case that he had followed closely and wrote about. We do speak about conspiracy theories, and we actually recorded that interview right after the Capitol riot on January 6th, 2021, so that does come up a little bit near the end of the conversation. Also, his obsessive compulsive disorder a little bit. So yeah, really wide-ranging conversation, and he's got a few really hilarious and just great lines in this conversation. So we do hope you enjoy it, and it's a very sad loss for the Crawlspace family. And yeah, he had the rare form of cancer called soft tissue sarcoma. So our best goes to James's wife and his family. Welcome back to the podcast, the one and only James McMahon. How are you today, James?
I'm good. It's very strange seeing your faces, having spent such a long time binging your podcasts over the years. It's weird, man. It's weird. Human beings, you know, not these sort of discombobulated voices.
Do people say the same thing about you when they're talking about reading all of your works that you've done, and then they see your face and they're like, oh, I've only associated you with words?
I'm sure they say far worse than that.
Oh, stop it. How are you? Are you busy? I feel like you're always doing something.
Yeah, no, I am busy actually at the moment. I appreciate you saying that, because I really do try to throw myself into the stuff that I do. But I feel like this year I've sort of been especially busy, really. Just, you know, I think could be really easy to despair about the reality of so many things in our lives. And I sort of made a bit of a pact with myself at the turn of the year that that was just going to kind of make me kind of like work harder and try and do more things. And if I had an idea to do something, I was going to kind of jump straight on it and kind of not let that thought, kind of that idea like pass me by. Like I hate wasted ideas. So yeah, no, really busy at the moment. Working on a book, which is like a sort of OCD music journalism memoir. I spent years and years working at music magazines. It kind of felt like I had something to talk about again.
Good. Well, you're always welcome here. And yeah, we had a great conversation last time, and we invite anyone who hasn't heard that one to go back and check that one out. And I think you hit a note that I wanted to mention too, James. Like, we have a lot of the same interests. A lot of the stuff you've written about is horror movies. You've written about music. You've written about missing people, and now Bigfoot. And these are all things we really love to talk about on the show and off. And Bigfoot especially is one thing that we've been really dying to kind of delve into deeper on the air because it's lighter and it's just a fun topic.
Yeah, totally, man. I mean, let's start this with, do you believe?
100%. 100%.
Wow.
Well, I want to back up real quick because there's Tim's virtual background. I want to back up real quick because you said something that I want to just get an answer on, and feel free to make it a quick answer. You said that you hated wasting ideas. You hated losing ideas. Do you have a technique or a method for keeping these ideas?
I mean, I've got a bit of my wife despairs of this, but I have I never write an idea down because I've sort of convinced myself over the years that if I have a idea and I don't remember it, then it probably wasn't a good idea, which my wife thinks is preposterous, but it has always served me kind of pretty well. I think the thing is without getting too heavy from the off, is I'm sure you've seen from like stuff I've written about or social media or whatever, is that I have OCD, which is which is kind of the bane of my life really. And the last couple of years has been a real voyage of acceptance and education, really, like trying to learn more about it, but also kind of a degree of advocacy, which helps me enormously to connect with other people who have what I think is an unbelievably misunderstood disorder. And I think the thing with OCD is that it can be so all-consuming in terms of brain space that there have been ideas. I've always thought I'm a really busy creative person, but at the same time, I also know that for a lot of my life, I definitely feel like I've operated at like half capacity, if that, in terms of the space that I have to think about things, because there's always these kind of crazy obsessions, rituals, ruminations kind of going on, which is part of the disorder. And I think that I just kind of reached a point where I went, if you have an idea, do the idea, because otherwise, the longer you, not procrastinate, that's the wrong word, but the longer you don't try and make this a reality, the more time there is for some bonkers, that's probably a bit frivolous, really. I'm going to go with like malignant obsession to kind of creep in, So yeah, no, I think that's a bit of it. Like, I also there's a book that really changed my life probably about 10 years ago now, which is by a guy called Paul Arden, who was like a creative director at Saatchi, the advertising agency. He's passed away now, but I think he wrote 3 books, and any of them are worth investigating. But he had this whole kind of thing about creativity and kind of where ideas came from, and like really a lot of his stuff was almost like sort of philosophy to me, really. Some of it validated things that I thought and already, and it kind of articulated it for me, but some of it was just so kind of eye-opening to me. Like, I never really get that writer's block thing, like I've loads of sympathy for people who have writer's block, but like I don't think it exists, because I just think that people haven't they don't have the tools to kind of navigate it. And his whole thing was always, if you don't have an idea, like, you have an idea because you always have something in front of you. So if you don't know what to write about, like, write about the thing that's in front of you, and eventually it will lead you out of like the kind of creative malaise that you might have. So I don't know. I've been lucky to kind of, stumble upon some wisdom along the way, really. Also, what else is there?
Hey,
You know, it's like,
yeah.
it's like, I don't know. I've always wanted to make things and do things and communicate with people and, kind of try and kind of put good stuff into the world. And I just don't really understand what, kind of people do if you're not doing that. But then again, I don't have kids, and there's, other people have pressures that I don't have, so.
That's a great answer. I love our conversations because I ask a question like that and you just get this answer that's so like layered and you take something from it. So yeah, appreciate it.
I mean, I do think it's funny that you said, "Oh, feel free to be brief about this," and then I launched into a incredibly wordy, layered answer. But anyway,
I thought you were gonna just say no. I just write them on Post-it notes and stick them on my computer.
No, man, post-it notes to the enemy, man. Like I say, I don't totally know whether that. I don't totally know whether that thing of if you have an idea, if you don't write it down, if you forget it, then it probably wasn't a good idea anyway. I don't know how true that is, but I just know that it's always worked for me, But I just genuinely think I can still remember, when I worked at music mags, I worked at 2 music mags, which were like kind of the two biggest like weekly music mags in Britain. And at the second music mag I worked at, I was the editor. I've been features editor at the first one, which is sort of 3 or 4 kind of down the ladder. I was always just kind of revisiting ideas that I didn't utilize 10 years before, but kind of was just waiting for an opportunity, really. And I always joke about this like one idea that I've never used, which was when I worked at the NME, which is was my kind of first job in music journalism. There was kind of a conversation about kind of how useful live reviews were, like reviewing like live gigs. I mean, certainly it feels very archaic to think about that in the age that we're living in. But sometimes it was, some of our reviews could just be quite boring because, you go watch a band, the crowd goes wild and all these kind of cliches just kind of spew out. And I kind of struck upon this idea that maybe we could do a section of the magazine that was called Gigraph, and it was going to be a man dressed as a giraffe that would go to gigs and kind of basically cause a nuisance. He would like crowd surf or, I don't know, just sort of try and get backstage or whatever. That's an idea which I've never realized because I think it's a terrible idea. But I often kind of come back to kind of what are the ideas that the ones that kind of got away, and Gigraph is definitely kind of sat in limbo somewhere, kind of mourning the fact that he was never made reality. If anyone's listening to this who works for a music magazine, feel free to have Gigraph. Make it happen.
That is hilarious. Gigraph.
Because it sounds a bit like giraffe. That's the funny bit.
Yeah, no, I see it. It looks that way too in my mind.
Totally. I am sorry for derailing the Bigfoot conversation. Tim's been very excited about it. He's been.
I mean, we can keep putting it off if you want. Just as Tim's about to get into it, just feel free to throw in some sort of tangent.
Oh, absolutely. You don't need to invite me into that room many times.
I definitely feel like it's your role in the pair of you, and what you do, Lance, is to kind of take a left turn.
I'll take lefts, rights. I'll go backwards. I'll travel in time.
Yeah, color the subject, the topic a little bit. I think I'll usually introduce things, set him up, and he knocks them down. I think that's the way. Yeah.
I tell you what I will say is I think the missing rebrand is really smart. I think it's really good. I think when I first heard it, much like anyone is with change, I was a bit like, what are they doing? They've lost their minds. But I mean, it's smart, man, because it's I do think it's amazing the resource that you've kind of been working on with the the investigations. I can't remember the full title, the thing with Brianna Maitland's dad, and just using that platform for for more good and stuff. And also it's that thing with Maura that you feel like you're kind of about to arrive at some sort of not a conclusion really, but like you feel like it's kind of moving forward, and then it just splinters off into chaos again. So I think that actually, having a wider remit is really smart, while also kind of keeping that kind of central investigation going. I think it's good.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, I really appreciate that. Yeah, it kind of felt natural for us, more of a formalized, I guess, shift of title and everything, because we had been covering other cases and working with PIs for the missing for over a year or so now. So yeah, and the word missing is in both. I mean, it just seemed to work for a transition. Yeah.
It's weird. I was thinking about, and again, I'm just putting off Bigfoot. But last time I was on, I was talking about Andrew Gosden, which is my real kind of, sort of pet case, if that's not too disrespectful to say. It's kind of been strange, actually, the last kind of like 12 months. There's a real kind of, there's a subreddit which is kind of like started, and there's definitely people who are trying to do the kind of civilian armchair detective thing, which they weren't, before. It was like as cold as, it was just this kind of, if you were interested in, mysteries or strange going-ons in the UK, like Andrew Gosling was sort of almost, sort of top of the pile, but there wasn't like an active community of people who were trying to solve it, for want of a better word. And that's definitely become a thing. I don't know how successful it is going to be, or, it ever could be, because the thing with that case is that there is just so many dead ends. Like the thing with Maura Murray is right from the off, there was just so much to, kind of dig into. But when I've been on that subreddit, I have thought to myself that it's definitely been influenced by, kind of what, you guys have done, or what kind of surrounds like the kind of, the kind of Maura Murray community. Like it feels like people are trying to replicate that. So I think that's a good thing, But I also think as well that some of the chaos that you guys have experienced with Maura Murray has already started to creep into this Andrew Gosden stuff as well, because there's been a case of a couple of people getting named on Reddit that shouldn't be named, and people kind of making speculative claims about people that there's no evidence to kind of attribute to them. So it's definitely there's definitely two ways of looking at it, but it is hard to kind of spend any time on there, which I will do at 4 o'clock in the morning whenever I can't sleep, and not think about you guys.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks for keeping us in your mind. Yeah. And I think that's sort of a slippery slope. And I think on a place like Reddit, it's important to have rules and someone or people who can moderate that, in Reddit or Facebook groups or something like that.
Yeah, totally. Do you want to talk about Bigfoot then?
I really do. I really do. Please, guys, stop diverting.
So Lance is a believer.
Oh, I'm totally a believer. And I wish more people were believers. I don't know if you're familiar with this gentleman, Christopher Garetano, but he has a show, and we do a show on our network with him. But he said, it's just hard to imagine that there are things in such deep areas of the wilderness that don't have the capability to watch us and know to hide, and know that, we're not a friendly, I mean, that's not exactly what he said, but we are not the only things. And it's like with aliens too. We are a bit arrogant if we're thinking that this is the end all and be all, and there's no other life form that has achieved any sort of intelligence close to what we have. So I fully believe that there could be something with almost our intelligence out there deep in the woods, getting the occasional sighting from time to time, and knowing enough to see us and watch us from the distance, and retreat when necessary.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program.
Quick anecdote. I am dying to run through my new neighborhood in a Bigfoot costume during a snowstorm. It was snowing the other night, and my girlfriend and I were having dinner, and I said, if we had a Bigfoot costume here, I would leave and go run through the neighborhood. And then we formed this whole plan about where we would hide the costume so I could change, and how we could pull it off, and just read like the community Facebook page.
Having spent a little bit of time, I wrote this piece for the Face, about British Bigfoot. And I love the idea of this kind of British take on it. I do believe in some quite strange things within Britain, which is obviously such a small landmass compared to where you guys are. But, I believe that there are ABCs, I believe there are alien big cats, is what you would call it. Like, there was quite a famous case where I'm from in South Yorkshire of, some people who thought they'd seen a tiger. And I think stuff escapes private collections and things like that. But my personal belief is I'm not sure that, Britain could sustain, an intelligent humanid life form. But on the occasions I've been to the States, like, you guys are like, how far are you from Boston?
Oh, very close.
Yeah, so I went to Boston probably 10 years ago, and I'm trying to remember where it was that where I stayed, but it was on the kind of outskirts. And I remember kind of getting driven through some forest, and I remember kind of thinking you could definitely have something living in that forest that no one knows what it is, but I just think it's sort of so strange that no one can like focus their camera, like when they see this stuff. Or
what are you talking about? Patterson Gimlet, look at that.
I mean, this is the thing though, man. That's been disproved like so many times.
What?
Well, I mean, again though, it's like it's almost that sort of kind of Fox Mulder thing of like I want to believe, really. It's like I almost kind of when they want to like critique this stuff, it kind of irritates me. I went to stay in about Nessie, obviously, right?
Yes, definitely.
So I went to Loch Ness again, sort of maybe like 5 years ago, and stayed right on the kind of shore. And like I've been obsessed with the Loch Ness monster since I was a little kid, and I was convinced that I would kind of wake up one morning, like step onto the patio of this hotel we were staying in, which was like this kind of old monastery on the banks of Loch Ness, and I would just see Nessie. Like that was like how things were supposed to be. Like I dreamt of that since being like a little kid, and I came away from it basically sure that Nessie didn't exist. And because there's like some visitor centers and that explain the kind of science of it and things I've never really kind of bothered to actually sort of dig into, really. I just like the idea of there being a kind of a prehistoric hangover living in this massive kind of space of water. But I just came away from it just feeling really miserable. I don't know, man. Like I want to believe, like I almost kind of preferred believing and that being based on no factual basis rather than actually coming away and being a realist.
Well, how dare you wait for evidence with this kind of thing? I don't. What are you doing?
It's not. I mean, it's not an age to. I mean, evidence isn't like really in fashion right now in so many elements of the world, isn't it? Do you not feel that's one of the things that like 2020, 2021, it's really ruined conspiracy theories for me. I love conspiracy theories. I can talk conspiracy theories all day, but conspiracy theories are basically ruining the world. Like I miss the days when conspiracy theories were fun.
Yeah, harmless. Yeah.
How fun was it to discuss flat Earth or Bigfoot? But like discussing flat Earth and trying to disprove it, and there was really no danger there, right? Or there was no perceived danger. I just saw a documentary. I forgot what it's called. I think it's called "Searching for Flat Earth," and it all connects to QAnon. Everyone who was into flat Earth somehow was connected to QAnon, and I thought the same thing. I was like, flat Earth used to be something that would challenge like your brain as you tried to explain why it didn't exist to flat Earth believers. And now, again, it felt harmless. But you're right. Like these conspiracies are no longer harmless. They're no longer fun. They're no longer a conversation that can just end with a laugh.
But the paranormal stuff, that can
still have paranormal.
Yeah.
The Proud Boys aren't going to ruin ghosts for me, like I refuse to let that happen. No, like I don't know.
Give them some time.
Yeah, no, totally. I think it's weird that I wrote this piece for being like really interested in mental health. Like I wrote this piece for a magazine in the UK called Prospect that was about almost kind of like when conspiracy theories get dangerous and whether there was any kind of like link between depression or poor mental health and conspiracies. I'm very kind of like cautious about kind of playing amateur psychologist and like diagnosing people without, knowing what I'm doing basically. But wondered whether there was any kind of like link between like depression and a belief in conspiracy. And there's been loads of research that's been done on it that suggests there probably is. And I do think that, you probably don't need a doctorate in this stuff to think that the dislocation that people feel in the modern world probably kind of ties into, or kind of the lack of faith in institutions, government, or kind of those established systems that sort of basically kept the world ticking over to a degree, then being eroded has kind of led to people kind of believing this kind of strange stuff. And I have had a couple of friends who, really close friends who thankfully have come out the other side that have said some strange things to me. And like when I've dug into it a little bit more, I've realized that the problem really isn't that they sort of believe this stuff per se, but that they've had all the problems in their lives. Not that that's a kind of like, let's look at everyone who was at the kind of Capitol riots and kind of feel sorry for them. But I do think that it says something larger about the state of the world as opposed to just people believing crazy stuff. It's weird. In that Bigfoot piece that I did for the Face, Harry Rose, one of the guys I speak to, he, very similar to me, was like obsessed with Bigfoot as a little kid. Loved the idea of there being, kind of like another intelligent life form, kind of doing their thing. And he kind of realized that when he was in, when he was in way over his head, like in a tent, kind of up a hill in Wales, kind of 2 months in, he realized that this really was about like the death of his dad. His dad had died, kind of not long before, and this was really kind of him almost like trying to connect with like a memory of, kind of when things were happier, like when he was a kid, or this was kind of like too much space in that, too much kind of space in his head or too much time in his hands or whatever. And I do think that, I don't know, almost like the sociological side of this stuff is almost as interesting as the mystery itself, It's a bit like what you guys were doing in the beginning with your Muramuri documentary, that it was not so much, well, it was about the kind of the mystery, but it was also about the people who had kind of taken this on.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we have a guest that we just interviewed this week coming up on Crawlspace. His name is Jatarth, and he was a QAnon follower. And he sort of theorized that trauma led a lot of people to, like personal trauma in people's lives led them to becoming, really into that conspiracy. So I think what you're saying is a lot of what that person said, who, he would know, I think, in a lot of cases.
I really did, without being too kind of like too much of a doom monger about this. Like I do really wonder what we're going to be like if there is the other side of COVID, because I just think people are just rattling around in their heads. It's sometimes so strange. Like when I was on about OCD, like OCD is so, I can't even explain what it's kind of like if you kind of don't have it. It's kind of characterized as this, kind of about order and symmetry and cleanliness, and there is a degree of that to it, but it's so much more than that. Like there's this kind of facet of OCD called magical thinking, which is where you kind of believe you have thoughts that you think can influence like the non-physical world, and like my stuff kind of like skirts on that. But I've had kind of treatment, and I can quite often, well, always really like go, oh, that's not how the world works. That's crazy, like just because like you've seen this yellow car doesn't mean that this is a fact or whatever. And there is sometimes where I just think, being part of that kind of community, and we're like some of the sanest people I've ever met, and yet there's all of this chaos going on in our brains. But people who are just kind of being pushed to the fringes of society just think things are far stranger, I think.
Do you think that there is some otherworldly type force that is conducting this test on humanity? Because it is a test.
I mean, that's not where I thought this was going to go. I mean, it's weird, man, because it's like, again, like I had a thing for years with like coincidence. I would have like the strangest coincidence. Like I would listen to a song, and I would find out, kind of 15 minutes later that like the person who's written that song had died. Like it would come up on Twitter, or just like little things, like kind of thinking of someone and then them calling straight away. And I guess that kind of, before I really understood a lot about OCD, like I thought there was something in that, like there was definitely part of me in my younger days that kind of went, oh, is that part of the cosmos? Is that like part of like who we are as humans? And especially as someone who's interested in this stuff, who's interested in, MK Ultra, or like all of the weird shit that we like,
Right. Is it the universe speaking with you?
Totally, and I'm not particularly religious, but I think I've got like kind of like spiritual beliefs, so like where does that kind of play a part in it all? And I just think that a little bit with me, like I have to go, I'm aware of how strange the brain can be. So, I was thinking about this yesterday. I put out a little shout out on Twitter because I'm kind of looking for some stories at the moment, some things to kind of pitch around and write about. And I always try, again, it kind of goes back to that kind of creativity or kind of ideas. When I'm kind of struggling about things to write about, I will often, I'll just watch documentaries, or I'll just listen to podcasts, or sometimes I'll just say to people, like, what's the weirdest things ever happened to you? And I did that shout out on Twitter yesterday, and loads of people were telling me, most of it was like paranormal related, and people were telling me some like crazy stories, like some of them on like DMs. It was just, I was having a hoot. And I've only ever really had what I think is like one paranormal experience, which is that I had some friends years ago who constantly told me that they lived in a house and they'd seen a ghost. And I was obviously fascinated by that because, ghosts rock. But I was also really skeptical, because, I think that's the best way to approach kind of things. And I remember being around there one night, and my friends, they were a couple, and the woman went off into the kitchen and said, hey, would you like a cup of tea? I said, I'd love a cup of tea. Probably like 20 seconds later, I felt a hand on my shoulder, and I said, thank you. And then no one replied, and I turned around and no one was there, and she was still in the kitchen. She hadn't even put the kettle on at that point. And I was always like, that's really strange. I feel like I've been touched and kind of gripped in this house where people say that they keep seeing this thing. But at the same time, like, I can't run with that. Knowing how tricksy and difficult like the brain can be, you can't just go, oh yeah, well, that's obviously proof that there's a supernatural entity, because I know myself how strange thoughts I can have because of the OCD, so, what else is going on there? Is there some sort of like, and again, I'm saying this without, kind of not having no academic knowledge of any of this, but is there something inside of us that feels and sees the things that we want to see? Like how much of that has got to do with it? So yeah, no, I'm not sure whether this is all a test, but I definitely still feel like we are at the beginning of our species, still trying to make sense of so many things, and that we don't know half what we think we do.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program.
Ooh, yeah, good stuff. So when did you fire up the Ouija board when you were in that house?
Oh man, no, I didn't in that house. I mean, the Ouija board thing's weird, isn't it? Because like, I think the Ouija board's a really good example of almost what I'm saying, really. In that, I've done Ouija boards because, I was once a teenager who liked heavy metal and horror movies, and like, kind of weird stuff's happened, but I can't really kind of buy into the Ouija board thing because it feels a little bit like, I don't know, like thinking, oh yeah, I can communicate with the other side via a Rubik's Cube. It's like a kid's toy, like how is that a thing? Like if there is a kind of spirit world, are they all like, oh, well, can't speak to these guys yet, but when they get out that kid's toy, like that'll really help us be able to connect with them. And I sometimes wonder whether when I've done a Ouija board and a glass has been whizzing around, on on a board, which is a thing that's happened. Like, how much of that is like, I don't know, when people are together, are they able to kind of synchronize consciousness? That to me probably seems more believable than a kid's toy being a vessel to communicate with the other side. We've got to be really careful that we don't end up becoming, this doesn't end up becoming info wars, but I think we're all smart, empathetic, questioning enough for that not to happen.
Yeah, I think we're okay.
Says the man in front of a man in a gorilla costume.
Right. I think it's, keeping an open mind is important with all this stuff. I think being able to even consider that you're wrong or that your previous beliefs were just wrong is really important.
I mean, that's why we're all, I think that's why we've all been led to this stuff really anyway, isn't it? Like, I think we all want to, I think for me, I've questioned so much, like, what is it that interests me about this stuff? And I think it's kind of wanting magic to still exist in a sense. I don't think it's any coincidence that when I was a kid, I was obsessed with like magic shows before I was obsessed with any of this stuff, I don't know. I definitely feel like we are kindred spirits, in this way. Like, what kind of led to it for you guys?
Well, I think you just hit on something there too. Like, I do want to believe in this stuff too. And I want to believe in magic. I want to believe in Bigfoot and ghosts and aliens. And a big part of me, when you asked that question, I was really thinking about it, about Bigfoot. Do I believe? And I think my answer would have to be the same about Bigfoot and with deep space and with deep sea. I think there are things there that we don't know yet. And part of me thinks anything less than being open about that is too close-minded. But I admit that there's not any solid proof yet, and that's kind of weird. A part of me was kind of trying to joke a little while ago about what could help depression during COVID is declassification of UFOs, but that's just me kind of hoping.
I mean, the UFOs are like a no-brainer, right?
Okay, I think they're all in the same bucket. And you brought up one that I never even heard of, ABCs, alien big cats. I'm all about it. Let's
talk about alien big cats.
well, transporting or a shapeshifter, right? Lance automatically assumed Bigfoot was less intelligent than humans. How do we know Bigfoot isn't more intelligent or have the ability to shapeshift? I'll go on mute now.
I mean, I think I think there's sometimes something in I don't know. It's like we think that we are this the smartest species on the planet, but at the same time, there are days when I kind of I'm sat at my laptop where I'm like, we have got life completely wrong. Like like I've got guinea pigs, right? And like they are my pride and joy, and me and my wife will sometimes just like stand and look at guinea pigs, just like just with hay all over his face, like just having a whale of a time, and think, have we really got it right? When I'm scrabbling around on a Sunday night trying to do a tax return, or she works in music, she's stressing about the music industry falling apart because no one can tour or whatever. There is part of me going like, would I be happy if I was a guinea pig? I think that like I mean, for me, that's
You're thinking about the ABCs.
ABC, Sesame Street. I think that one's really, I mean, that one's just obvious to me, like, because a lot of this stuff just comes down to like, just comes down to logic, like there are loads. So in this case, there are loads of zoos in the UK. I'm, I've always been really super interested in like wildlife and the natural world and stuff. Like, me and my wife kind of joke that, we don't like go to the pub, like we'll go to like a wildlife park. It's like a thing for us, and like I've been to some places that really should be shut down, and like you go, I think that animal could get over that fence, and I'm not totally sure whether anyone would even notice, and like there have been loads of stories like that in the UK with the Bigfoot, the British Bigfoot story that I wrote. When I kind of dug into sightings in the area I went to, which is Thetford Forest, which is in kind of like Norfolk, Suffolk in the UK, like there'd been sightings of like bears there, like in the 70s. And obviously like bears aren't like indigenous to like Britain, but when I was a little kid, like before like society knew better, like circuses were all over the country. Like I definitely remember going to the circus as like a little kid and like seeing like performing animals, which makes me shudder thinking that, the memory that was a thing. But people lose stuff, like, what's to say that like, someone didn't lose a bear? People were talking about seeing bears in the, 70s and stuff. So, and I also just think with like the whole alien big cats, is like British people have been talking about seeing wild cats, not wild cats, but like seeing big cats, panthers, leopards, and so on in Britain for, decades. So that for me is like a no-brainer. The same with like the UFO stuff is that if you really allow yourself to think about like space, time, galaxy, all of that, I mean, firstly, I think it's a route to madness, because how could you ever comprehend that? But of course there's aliens, of course there are, like that's of course. And to be honest, there was a point last year following the news cycle where it was, every day was just like this roulette wheel of weirdness where I was like, it's going to be UFOs next. Like aliens, this is it. Aliens are going to get confirmed like any day now. And I still think that that's going to happen. And this is a time scale based on, no evidence whatsoever. But my gut still tells me that's going to be soon. I'm like fairly certain of it,
I think I kind of feel like you're right, and I agree it's not based on much, but there have been a million sightings like over the years, but I mean mostly starting in like the 50s in America, at least from my perspective over on this side of the pond. But the government has been declassifying more and more documents recently. The video lately that was really interesting, and more documents lately that I haven't really dug into yet. So I think there's some hope there. But okay, if you don't believe it, if you don't believe in Bigfoot, where are all the sightings from? Every single person is making all this stuff up?
Well, I mean, your co-host, like Lance, the great Lance, has basically just talked about his desire to wear a gorilla costume and go running through the snow. So,
just gonna say, like, yes, exactly.
So I think that's that explains a lot of it. Like, I mean, there are like all the time there are people who, I mean, every year there are species that we thought were extinct that turn up on people's radars. So the idea of there being a new species or an undiscovered species, I don't think is totally beyond the realms of comprehension. And I think that with Bigfoot, when you start digging into it and realize that every country, whether it's like the Yowie in Australia or the Green Man in Britain or whatever, like every society has their own Bigfoot, their own version. So logic would suggest there's maybe something in it, but you would have thought by now like we would have found a carcass.
Well, I do want to mention that Boston actually does have its very own Yeti. And this happened a few years ago during a snowstorm. The Boston Yeti that you can Google, and it was actually a Somerville, Massachusetts resident named John Capopiano, a 30-year-old guy who decided to dress up as Yeti and walk around during the blizzard. So this has been done before, in Boston specifically.
Did you say his name was Lance?
Amazingly, no. I mean, Lance would be a copycat.
I would. I totally forgot about the Boston Yeti. That was during that brutal winter where we just kept getting slammed by snow. And you know what that did? That created some sort of lightness to that really long, cold, snow-filled winter to get these like updates that the Boston Yeti was seen again. And it's so funny to see him on like Beacon Street in like a Yeti costume. Hilarious.
I do lean towards there maybe is something that we think is the Yeti. No, I do think there is maybe I do think there's maybe something in the Himalayas, yeah, I think there was some research that was done by Oxford University, it was 2017, that maybe suggested that it was an oversized kind of prehistoric hangover that was some form of polar bear. And that kind of rang a bell with me. That kind of made me think, maybe there's kind of something in that. No, what I was going to say was the wormhole wormhole, rabbit hole that I'm so kind of far down at the moment is, where do you stand on the Smiley Face Killers?
Oh my, the Smiley Face Killer. I mean, I think I don't want to cast any shade on anyone who's investigating the Smiley Face Killer, but at some point, or killers, it's the same thing with the Bigfoot theory, right? Like, no one's seen anything, like no one's talked. If you're going to have this connected, like interconnected network of serial killers all over the country, and their calling card is the smiley face graffiti, I mean, how are you connecting these in the first place? How has no one talked? And it's really easy to identify bodies that were dumped, right? So if someone's murdered and then they're dumped, where do you typically dump a body? Probably in an area that has some form of graffiti. I mean, you don't dump a body in a pristine location. You try to dump a body in an area where it's shady and, just like the other side of the tracks. And how much graffiti has a smiley face in it? Probably a huge percentage. But that all being said, I do really appreciate the energy that people put into things like that.
Yeah, it's a weird one with that though, isn't it? Because my general feeling on serial killers is that, don't misinterpret what I'm trying to say here, because serial killers, man, they can do one, But I generally find that serial killers are boring. Like the reason why I'm kind of interested in like true crime, well, I mean, apart from the sort of hope that you can help like victims and people who've suffered, but also it is that kind of sociological side of things. We're trying to understand why people do the things they do. Like serial killers, I think we sometimes kind of fall down this hole of thinking that that all serial killers are like the Zodiac, and I sort of have like a belief, and I have a belief that the Zodiac probably wasn't one person, like that it's sort of almost like it was kind of a crime, and then there was a copycat, and then that was kind of built upon, and it kind of became this. And I think the people who do this stuff, the people who take lives, like there's no artistry to it or a craft. Like it's more carnal than that, And I think the idea that somehow there is this, sort of nefarious network of, wrongdoers who, leave a calling card of a smiley face, or, sort of are somehow on encrypted communication devices, like kind of doing this in tandem with each other, it's like a Blumhouse movie or something, which I actually think it is a horror movie at the moment. I'm sure I saw that the other day on a streaming service. Do you not think that some of them are murders?
Yeah, I think absolutely some of them are murders. I think some of them are suicides. Some of them are probably accidental deaths. But yeah, I think to think that they're all connected, or even a lot of them are connected, is just way too much coordination to actually happen, I think. I mean, we see it. Just look at anyone out there listening. Look at your life and how coordinated things are with you and your friends, and how often people are late or mess up the directions, or just anything, whatever can go wrong will go wrong. So there's just zero chance in my mind that this is a huge coordinated network. Now, could there be a couple of them? Sure, there could be a few connected here and there, but definitely an anomaly.
I agree with everything you're saying there, but like when I was watching the Capitol riots the other day, which was so bonkers, man. Like I was in the middle of there's a psychiatrist in Britain called Dr. David Veal, who is like he's quite a groundbreaking kind of voice on OCD, and he was doing a kind of a Zoom that evening on sort of the science of sleep. And unsurprisingly, for someone who has all this stuff bouncing around their head, like I'm not always great with sleep. So, I was kind of listening to this talk, and I checked Twitter because obviously I'm a hopeless addict, and saw the footage of people trying to get into the Capitol. Obviously was in complete disbelief, and then like which was a real juxtaposition with this kind of very clever academic kind of basically talking about relaxation and peace and mindfulness and so on. But the more and more I dig into the fallout of the Capitol riots, which I think is obviously going to be going on for years, the more I think, well, yeah, like lots of people can coordinate to do really bad things, because the more and more you like dig into that stuff, I mean, that stuff runs deep, man,
Absolutely, yeah. But just imagine if there was any real coordination with that riot. I don't think there really was much, other than a march or a rally, and then people marched that way, and then there was kind of just anarchy, in my opinion. But I do see what you're saying. I think it could have been a lot worse.
I think it's that thing when you start reading about like people who were involved, like, you know, having been on tours, like in the kind of months like leading up to it, or, you know, how much, again, you know, you got to be careful of not becoming Alex Jones, aren't you? But again, that whole kind of thing of like, were doors left open, you know, did people turn a blind eye to things, which I'm definitely in a space of kind of reading about it, but still trying to kind of authenticate how real this is and how much this is, you know, spin, or, you know, inverted commas, fake news, you know. But it did kind of make me, the thing that frightened me so much about it was this idea that, you know, the unthinkable, you know, could happen, you know, the idea that like like lots of people when they get together could be coordinated to do something, which was, you know, so terrifying.
Yeah, it's a little of column A and a little of column B, I think, because the coordination was there to the point where they showed up at this rally.
Yeah.
And then the coordination was there on the other side, where the instigators knew how to instigate and knew how to fire them up. And then you have this gray area where, for whatever reason, they were allowed to, and there's footage. This isn't conspiracy. There's footage of officers and people who are put in charge to keep the rally at a certain place, opened up gates, and they were allowed to get to that point on the stairs. And that's where I think the chaos comes into play, because I don't think they even realized they were going to get that close. And then they realized how far they were into it.
Yeah.
There's no turning back. I mean, some people did turn back, and that's not talked about a lot, but one woman got trampled to death because they just got caught up in the absolute chaos and anarchy of it. And I mean, the loss of lives of the officer last night was Officer Sicknick was laid in honor in the state capitol. I think it was the first time since the late 90s they did that to a non-congressperson, to lay them in honor. And he's laying in state right now. It's mind-boggling that happened. And that happened because of the chaos that ensued after the coordination. And again, like, imagine if they coordinated to storm the Capitol. Like, imagine if it wasn't like, oh wow, we're on the Capitol steps. To like,
yeah, no, I think that's a really good take on it, actually, in that, like, it wasn't kind of this network of people who were coordinated, but there was a degree of that, and there was a degree of just like rabble, you know, like almost like weaponizing idiots, basically. It kind of reminded me a bit of like when I was a kid. Like, I support a football team, soccer, proper football. And we had this kind of crazed, corrupt chairman. My football team's called Doncaster Rovers, which, you know, when you come and edit this, please keep that in, because I'll do like the fact that the true crime community will be aware of Doncaster Rovers. And we had this crazy, corrupt chairman who tried to burn down the ground for the insurance money. And there was like regular protests, like when I was growing up. So you'd go to a match, and you knew when you went to the match that you weren't going to watch it. You knew that like within 15 minutes, everyone would have ran on the pitch and kind of sat in the centre circle and tried to get the game cancelled. And that was your way of registering like your disapproval with like what was happening. I'll always remember like getting on the pitch, and then once you're on the pitch, you're like, well, what am I going to do now? And like normally I would just kind of walk around and go, it's kind of cool, I'm on a football pitch, you know. But like some people would like start doing stupid stuff, like, you know, digging up the goalposts, or, you know, kind of wanton kind of destruction, you know. It reminded me of that, really, where people were a bit like, oh my god, like we're past security, like what we can do now. And like a lot of them were just taking selfies, weren't they? So, you know, just like stuff that I've been obsessed with and thought about kind of all my life, and it's just none of it's as weird as like the news cycle, and like none of it's as like, you know, some of the true crime stuff, you know, none of it's kind of crazy, because a lot of those kind of like rules of what you thought was possible or the way the world works, like they've all been like torpedoed. It reminds me a bit of like, you know, the kind of Ariel Castro stuff. I remember when that happened, and like he was a fucking knobhead, wasn't he? When that happened, I remember being like, yeah, all bets are off now. You know, like missing people, literally anyone could be in anyone's basement. And I know that's kind of a really crass thing to say, but it really kind of changed my way of thinking about it, of just going, oh, right, that's an evil that I didn't think was possible. So yeah, no, sticking with Bigfoot, man. Bigfoot never lets you down.
What's amazing is that I still don't know what the alien big cat is.
Oh well, no, it's dead. I mean, they're not aliens, like, but alien in the sense that they're not like native to an area. So it's the idea of people seeing. Well, that said, there are some people who believe that they are shapeshifters, or there are people who, there is a kind of subset with British Bigfoot, for example, of people who believe that. And this makes it more fantastical in my view. It's like I can maybe kind of get on board with the idea that there is like a creature that we don't know what it is, but there are people who believe that it only appears to children, or there's almost something extraterrestrial about it. But there's like an ancient nature to Britain of you've got all of the kind of trimmings and trappings of the modern world, but at the same time it's only kind of only like 1,000 years ago, kind of people believe kind of some, like believe in kind of, kind of pagan beliefs. I always think about Stonehenge and just think that, however many miles away from London, like a 2-hour car journey from London, there are these massive rocks in the middle of a field and no one knows what they are. That's crazy to me, and it's no diss on America, because there's so many things I love about America, but I always kind of think that when you go to like a big American city and you kind of go, people say, oh, this is like 100 years old, and you're like, my parents' house is like 100 years old, like, but I think your part of the world is like quite similar in regards. How far are you from Salem?
From Salem?
Not far at all.
Oh, I'm like 15 minutes from Salem.
Oh man, if I lived in your part of the world, I just think I'd go to Salem every day just to be like, hey, I'm in Salem.
Over the summer, we went probably like almost every weekend. They had places that had outdoor seating, and they were really good about the social distancing and everything. And if you're going to be outside, if you need to get out, there's no better place to walk around than Salem. It is incredible.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, no, come spring. If we're ever allowed to kind of get on planes and kind of mingle again, and I'll take you to some weird places.
That'd be amazing. Yeah.
Same here.
And I would love to see Stonehenge. But you said that no one knew how those rocks were put there. I was pretty sure that we knew that Bigfoot put those there.
I think we've just solved one of the most enduring mysteries that the world has ever queried. See, that's it. I was just thinking. There's been parts of this podcast as I think that we approach the inevitable end. There's been parts of this podcast where I've gone, this could be the lowest. This could be the episode of Crawlspace which people have been most disinterested in, or most interested in. Who knows? I feel like it's right on the line. But I do think the fact that we've just solved the mystery of both Bigfoot and Stonehenge is quite the revelation. And if people have made it this far, then well done.